I think with fame, you're constantly bombarded with your self-image, consistently, pictures, photographs, TV performances. It's not natural for you to see yourself in that form all the time. And then all of a sudden you become extremely critical of yourself. And to be relaxed, you need a really solid head on your shoulders to be able to not criticize yourself at times, especially if you're young and you're growing up in this business.
I know that I wish I could be more help, that I could say I saw it coming. I wish I had seen it coming, that I could have helped her, but I didn't.
The world is full of people who work next door to battered wives and don't know they're battered. The world is full of loving families who contain an anorexic child or a drug-addicted child, and they don't know that the child is abusing drugs or food.
I really don't know if Richard even knew what was going on in the early stages. I really don't. Because that was a fairly new thing to deal with. Hardly anyone knew anything about it.
If the child, the sufferer, doesn't want you to see that he or she has the illness, and you as the parent or the brother don't want to see that he or she has the illness, that's a lockout. We don't want to see it. That's how it flourishes.
You see, she'd get her dinner, but she'd put the food under the plate so she didn't have to eat it. Because she didn't want to eat it. And that's when she got thinner and thinner. Nobody could make it any better. Nobody.
Now look at this family, the Carpenter's family. Utterly decent, totally consumed by their particular ethos. There is no place in that for a psychological illness.
Illness or not, the Carpenters kept on churning out hit after hit. By 1973, the Carpenters were America's sweethearts and were personally welcomed to the White House by President Richard Nixon.
And he said that they were big fans and how pleased that they were going to be. And he says, Pat, he says to Mrs. Nixon, "Yeah, I want you to meet Frank Pooler here. He's the director, orchestra director for the Carpenters." And then she went along the same tack, how pleased that they were. In his remarks that night, Nixon was pleased with the image that they projected to young America at that time.
She was a 5'4" tornado, a pair of drumsticks in her hand. A tomboy group who sang a little come on, started beating rhythm to the grand, making music.
The Carpenters going to the White House was sort of, yeah, there was a bit of, goody two-shoes and her brother, you know. Because being endorsed by Nixon was not exactly what you were looking for in those days. However, remember that Elvis Presley also went to the White House and happily posed for pictures with Richard Nixon, and in fact asked Dick Nixon to give him a badge so he could be a drug agent, and said he would actually help turn in druggies. I mean, and nobody castigated Elvis for that. I think the Carpenters there was a little bit of sneering at them as goody two-shoes. You'd expect Nixon to like them, kind of thing.
But their squeaky clean image had begun to work against them.
I think the president in those days only really blessed a squeaky clean music group. That was the only kind of group the president would have in the White House, were the Carpenters types. They were the only safe ones you could invite and not know what was going to happen. So it's understandable that they would be so popular among certain probably religious groups and not so popular among the more sarcastic crowd.
You know, Karen was wearing granny dresses and, you know, with high collars and big hair, and Richard was wearing these suits that kind of color coordinated with Karen and the rest of the group, and it was really kind of a good target for the press. You know, they really couldn't knock what they were doing musically because it was fantastic, but they found other ways. They reviewed the audience, or they reviewed their hairstyles.
We started to get picked at, first off, for, I think, introducing a softer sound into top 40, well, by people who didn't particularly like that. And then, of course, along came this barrage of 8x10 glossies and album covers and all that really made us look a lot more square, if you will, than we really were. If one listens to the music of the Carpenters with an open ear, I think there's no disputing the fact that it's pretty sophisticated stuff.
There's no getting over that rainbow when the smallest dreams won't come true. I can't take all the madness the world through, but I won't last a day without you.
Around 1976, the Carpenters really revamped their stage show. They wanted to go a little bit more for theatrics and some more drama. As they became more show people, they started dressing differently. Richard would roar onto stage on a motorcycle, and they really just tried a lot of different things.
But Richard and Karen's new image didn't take away the pressures of performing as brother and sister.
It's a funny thing about families. You only can understand it when you're really in it and when you're actually forming together. So I could understand, or we could understand, probably some of the problems that they would have gone through. It can be extremely claustrophobic. It has its great points as well, but there are negative points to it as well, as a lot of family bands, as you've seen throughout, have had severe problems. Just having a sense of yourself, a sense of your own individuality can be very, very difficult. You're always seen as 2 or 4. You're never really seen as, yourself.
By now, Richard was feeling that his contribution to the Carpenters' sound was being overshadowed by Karen's high profile.
People were kind of saying, he's the piano player with the Carpenters or whatever, and he was so much more. But, and Karen was his biggest fan and tried to tell people, he's doing this, 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 and, he's the one who just chooses our songs, he arranges them, he produces them, and all of these things. But people were still saying, well, what's the brother do?
I think it can be a problem in any band, not just family bands. I think if somebody's getting more attention than others, it can be a problem.
I think that probably Karen was able to let that roll off much more than Richard was, and I think to this day Richard would say that he was treated unfairly.
Richard was the arranger. He was the brains behind the thing. He was the driving force behind it.
One of the first changes that they made were they wanted to give Richard his due. And so one of the first changes that they made was to have Richard come out at the beginning of the show to the announcement, "Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Richard Carpenter."
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Richard Carpenter.
And he would lead the orchestra through kind of a short overture. So it kind of gave him his moment in the spotlight and said, this guy's in charge of what's going on musically here.
Richard was a very serious musician. He could hear it and he could find it, and he would tell you about it after every performance. And if someone was not up to snuff, he would let them know it.
He was the driving force. He was the brains, the arranger, and she was out in front all the time. But everything that she was doing with Richard's supervision.
There was no improvisation, not by a note, not by a word, not by the tapering of a phrase. Oh boy, did we have a controlling personality or two here. And when you have a controlling personality to that extent, and it has something that it can't control, which is how people feel about it, it turns in on itself, and it literally consumes itself.